Hi there. I know what some of you are going to say. When I argue that the dominant manufacturing operating model systematically suppresses frontline intelligence, that there are millions of workers in American factories and hospitals and warehouses and fulfillment centers whose problem solving capability has been deliberately designed out of their jobs, some of you will call it romantic nonsense. You'll say these are simple jobs performed by people the labor market sorted there, that there's no hidden intelligence being suppressed, that the system is just efficient. I welcome that objection because the evidence against it is overwhelming. And I'm going to spend the next 8 weeks on Saturdays laying it out, not with theory, not with philosophy, but with data, natural experiments, and documented performance outcomes that the skeptics will have to reckon with. We start with the strongest piece of evidence I know. A story so clean in its experimental design that if you proposed it as a controlled study, your IRB would reject it as too good to be true. So, you guessed it, we start with NUMMI. By the late 1970s, General Motors' Fremont Assembly Plant in California had earned a reputation that even GM's own leadership didn't dispute. It was the worst plant in the system. Absenteeism ran above 20%, which meant you didn't know which of the 1 in 5 in your team was not going to show up today. On some mornings, so few workers showed up that the supervisors had to cross the street to the local bar to drag people back to the line. I know a thing or two about dragging people from the local bar at Buick City and Flint. Wildcat strikes were routine. Workers drank on the job, did drugs on the job, and as multiple first-hand accounts confirm, had sex in the plant during shifts. Sabotage was a sport. Workers left bolts deliberately untightened. They stuffed Coke bottles inside door panels so the cars would rattle and annoy customers. Cars regularly rolled off the end of the line, inoperable, and had to be towed away for repairs. Under the union contract, workers were virtually impossible to fire. Management and labor existed in a state of Cold War. The plant was, by any reasonable measure, a disaster. So, in 1982, GM shut it down. If you stop the story here, you'd have a clean narrative. Bad workers, bad culture, bad outcomes. The labor market sorted those people into a factory. They proved themselves incapable, and the rational response was to close the doors. That narrative is wrong. And what happened next proved it. So in 1984, Toyota and GM reopened the Fremont plant as a joint venture called New United Motor Manufacturing Inc., NUMMI. Toyota would manage the plant, GM would contribute the facility, and both companies would sell the vehicles produced there. Here's what Toyota did that made this a natural experiment of extraordinary power. They rehired the same workforce. Over 85% of NUMMI's initial employees were UAW members from the old GM Fremont plant. Not the good ones, not a carefully screened subset, the same workforce. including, at the UAW's insistence, the same union leadership that had presided over GM's worst operation. GM was against rehiring the militants. Toyota agreed to it anyway. They believed their system could work with any workforce, a hypothesis they were about to test with the hardest possible case. Toyota did one other critical thing before reopening. They sent groups of these workers to Toyota's Takaoka plant in Japan. Not for a PowerPoint presentation, not for a classroom seminar. They put them on the assembly line. And I know what that's like. As we started Lansing Grand River, we got sent to the Opel Eisenach plant on the assembly line. They let them work inside a system that treated every worker as a problem solver, that gave them authority to stop the line when they saw a defect, that asked for their ideas and implemented them. The workers came back to Fremont and started building cars. Within a year, the plant that had been GM's worst became, drumroll, GM's best. Not good, not improved, the best. John Shook was there, an industrial anthropologist hired by Toyota in 1983 to help develop training programs for the venture. Shook had a front row seat to what he later called one of the most striking stories of cultural reinvention he had ever witnessed. Writing in the MIT Sloan Management Review, he put the outcome in terms that leave no room for ambiguity. We took the quality of the plant from GM's very worst to GM's very best. Not just bad to good, but worst to best in only 1 year. The exact same workers, including the old troublemakers, the only thing that changed was the system, the production and the management system. Let that sink in. The workers who'd been drinking on the line, sabotaging cars, walking off the job, those workers in the same building with the same union produced the highest quality vehicles in General Motors' entire North American operation in 12 months. A 2024 Harvard Business School case study by Willie Shih confirmed what practitioners had known for decades. Toyota transformed Fremont into the most productive auto assembly plant in the United States, with quality comparable to its Japanese factories. Isao Yoshino, the Toyota training manager at NUMMI's launch, reflected on the transformation with a simplicity that cuts through every layer of management theory. We did not do anything else. We just offered the opportunity for them to learn. And they voluntarily decided to change themselves. If it wasn't the people, what was it? The operating model. Specifically, Toyota replaced a system designed to suppress frontline intelligence with one designed to deploy it. Under GM's old model, the Fremont plant operated on pure Taylorist principles. Principles I'll trace back to their explicit origins in the next essay. Next Saturday, watch the space. Workers performed narrow, prescribed tasks. They had no authority to stop the line. Their ideas were not solicited. Their judgment was not valued. Problems were management's responsibility to identify and fix. The worker's job was to execute. Under this model, the rational worker response was exactly what GM got: disengagement, cynicism, sabotage, and for good measure, substance abuse. Not because the workers were incapable, but because the system told them every day that their capability was unwanted. Toyota's model inverted every one of those assumptions. Workers were organized into teams with real problem solving authority. Any worker would stop the production line, the famous andon cord. And we're going to talk about it a lot in the forthcoming essays on Saturday. They used the andon cord when they spotted a quality issue. Suggestions were actively solicited and rapidly implemented. Workers rotated through jobs and were cross-trained. The uniform, cafeteria, and parking lot were shared across all levels of the organization. A no layoff policy removed the existential fear that had driven much of the adversarial behavior. The culture changes ran deeper than process. Workers who visited Japan identified what motivated them to change. They were treated as intelligent contributors whose judgment mattered. For many of them, it was the first time in their working lives that a manager had asked what they thought. So here's what should haunt every manufacturing executive who reads the NUMMI story. GM had a front row seat for 25 years. They embedded managers at NUMMI. My HR manager at Lansing Grand River, Mike Reinert, was one of them. I'm looking forward to seeing his suitcase full of papers where he took notes of the time when he was at NUMMI. They studied the Toyota production system up close. And for 15 of those years, they failed to transfer the lessons to a single other plant in the United States. It wasn't that they didn't try. GM sent a team to replicate the approach at their Van Nuys plant in Southern California. It failed. The workers there had never lost their jobs and didn't believe they were at risk. But more importantly, the management system didn't change. As one of the GM managers who attempted the transfer recalled, the problem was a resistance to change that went beyond the workers. It permeated the entire management structure. By 1998, 15 years after NUMMI's founding, GM had still not successfully implemented lean manufacturing across its US operations. In 1999, they started a plant in Lansing called Lansing Grand River Assembly by taking many of us, including me, the trim shift leader, to an Opel plant in Eisenach to try the same experiment. This time, it succeeded, and that's part of many of the essays you will see here subsequently. But guess what? LGR wasn't enough. So by 2009, General Motors was bankrupt. The lesson is not that GM managers were stupid. The lesson is that intelligence suppression is structural. It's embedded in the operating model, the management incentives, the labor relations framework, and the cultural assumptions about what workers are capable of. It's not something one plant manager can fix by copying a set of tools. Hear this, lean consultants. It's a system, and as Deming told us, the system belongs to management. I'm opening this series by referencing a Forbes article about AI as a tool master, a force multiplier for professionals who direct it with expertise and judgment. The article profiles marketing directors and lawyers and CFOs who use AI to amplify their already deployed intelligence. Beautiful. Also incomplete. The article assumes, as nearly the entire AI conversation assumes, that the human intelligence is already active, that the professional already has judgment, context, and domain expertise. AI just makes them faster. What about the 80 million Americans who work frontline jobs in manufacturing, healthcare, logistics, retail, and service? What about the workers whose problem-solving muscles have been atrophied by a century of Taylorist operating models that told them explicitly to stop thinking. You cannot hand a power tool to someone whose intelligence has been systematically suppressed and expect toolmaster results. The AI becomes another compliance instrument, or worse, another justification for eliminating the human entirely. So NUMMI proved that the intelligence is there. It proved that the same people in a different system will generate extraordinary outcomes. The question for the AI era is not whether frontline workers are smart enough to use these tools. NUMMI answered that 40 years ago. The question is whether management is brave enough to build a system that lets them. Next week, we're going to talk about the confession in the blueprint and explore Frederick Taylor and what he told us exactly what he was doing. We stopped reading that. Till next week. Thank you.